What's up guys, welcome to the 35th Xamarin Android tutorial. And in this video what we're going to be doing is taking a look at a web view, okay? So the web view is something that is really handy when you need to do, you guessed it, any sort of web processing, okay? So if you need to pull up a web page or something, a web view is something that you can embed inside of your activities since it's just another view, and use that to load your URL. Okay, so an example here we have is a web view is being used as a simple browser, okay? So we took in a web view and added a few features to it that lets it act as a browser, okay? So what you can do here is go ahead and you can go into the URL edit text box, okay? And you can search for any sort of website like you normally would and it'll pull it up for you, okay? And then of course you can go back using the back button, search through Google, click on links, and so on, okay? The progress bar will come up. Just that's something that we will need to program in as well. So there you go. So I mean that's pretty much a simple browser that you can use, and that's using a web view, okay? So this is just gonna give you guys a good example of what a web view is and when to use it and how it can come in handy for your own applications, okay? So I'll go ahead and stop running that one, and we'll go ahead and we're going to start a new project. Okay, so the new project, let's go ahead and call it webview underscore tutorial. Okay. Now the first thing I'm going to do now is I'm going to come into my properties and change my minimum target version to API level 19. Okay, and that may be different for you, but that's what I'm going to change it to in my application. And now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the main XML file, okay? Now, this is where I'm going to do any designing. There's only going to be one XML file for this application. So let's go ahead and get started, all right? So the button we can go ahead and get rid of. We do not need that. Now, to add a web view is actually really simple. If you come over here to the toolbox inside of the composite tab, we have a web view right here. And if you just drag it over, it'll create a web view for us, okay? So there is our web view, and I'll change the ID to just web view, not web view 1, since it's going to be the only one. And I will start creating an edit text. Okay, so the edit text is going to act like the URL bar, okay, that you saw just a few moments ago, and it will take in whatever the user types in and then hand it off to the client that will then load the URL. Okay, so we'll get to that in a second, but let's create the design first, guys, and then from then we can go to the code behind and start working with it via the code. Okay, so just a few common parameters that I'm going to set for the edit text. I wanted to wrap the content, the height, and the input type I want it to be text, web, email, address, okay? So the text, web, email, address is specifying to the Android OS to when the keyboard is pulled up, to pull up something that's friendly to type in web email addresses. Just like as if you were to have numbers here, then it would pull up the number pad for the user can easily type in numbers, okay? So that's all that's doing. The next thing we're going to have is the IME action label, and here is the button that's going to be in the keyboard. It's the bottom right button, okay? So the action button, which always changes depending on the keyboard that's pulled up, and here you can actually override it and specify that you want it to say go, okay? And the last thing I'm going to do for the edit text is just a hint, okay? And a hint is really nice and handy when you want the user to be able to know what information to put inside of your text box, okay? And what's nice about this is when the user starts to type in some stuff, then this hint will go away, okay? So it's only here when there is no information inside of the edit text, okay? So that being said, let's go back to our design and let's see if this renders properly. And I'm rendered in API level 19, okay? So we have a URL and we have a web view. Now the first thing I notice is the web view is not matching as parent, okay? So that should happen. So we want it to fill the rest of the screen. that'll take care of that. So we're going to leave it at that. We'll come back to it and we're going to add the progress bar. Okay, the progress bar, we're going to need a relative layout to add the progress bar. Okay, but we don't need it quite yet. Okay, so let's go over here to our main activity, guys, and let's set up a few fields that will be used to create an instance of the tools that we just created. Okay, and what I mean by that is we need a web view. Okay, so the web view is something that we just created inside of our designer, and here we'll grab a reference of it through code. Okay, so we'll need to import the Android.WebKit, okay, for the web view, and we want to make another reference of edit text type, and we'll just call that edit text URL. Okay, so for these we're going to do some find view by ID, so these are going to be matched up to the web view over here, and the edit text will be the edit text over here. Okay, so if you guys have been following along with my tutorials or are just comfortable with Android, this is probably pretty cumbersome to you so far. Okay, so it's probably like I've done this a million times. You don't have to explain it. I do apologize, but if you're anyone new, hopefully that helped. Okay, so the resource.id is going to be web view for the web view, and then edit text. Let's do a ID of, yeah, it's going to be txt URL. Okay, and it's not recognizing it because we haven't rebuilt it for a while. It needs to rebuild it and compile the XML file, and then it'll recognize it. Okay, so let's do the same thing for the txt URL component. Okay, so we'll do edit text, and this ID is txt URL. Okay, so now that we have our views instantiated and we have a reference to them via the code now we can start manipulating them the way we want. Okay, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set a setting inside of the property inside of the web view. Okay, and that's JavaScript Enabled. Okay, so I do want JavaScript Enabled inside of the web view, and this is really important, guys, because obviously you probably know that most of the web is ran off of JavaScript as the dominant scripting language of the internet. So to have it enabled is very important, because if it's not, then a lot of stuff's going to go wrong in certain situations. Okay, so we definitely want to enable that. And the next thing we want to do is we want to load a URL. Okay, now the default URL I'm just choosing to be google.com, but you can choose it to be whatever you want. And what this will do is load this web page on startup. Okay, so as of right now, guys, this is pretty simple, but we do have a web view set up and ready to go, however primitive it may be, but it is ready. Okay, but when we run it, we should be able to see, guys, that there's something that's weird that's going to happen. And so keep your eye on the screen real quick. So because you'll see that the web view, what will happen is the web view will actually not display the page, but the actual browser will. Okay, and that's what it was, just right there. So what happened was the load URL got called, and because what happens is the Android OS takes the URL and says, oh, okay, well then I'll go ahead and I'll call the default browser for the phone and go ahead and handle this URL request. And that's exactly what it did. So the web view is actually right here, blank. Okay, because it was never able to handle the URL request because it was taken over by the default browser inside the phone. All right, and that's obviously not ideal. So in order to stop that, guys, we need something that's called a web view client. Okay, and a web view client handles a lot of that request handling for the web view. Okay, and the reason why it didn't happen is because we don't have one yet. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a class, and it's going to subclass the web view client. Okay, so we'll call it web client, and we're going to keep it in the same file. Okay, but I do recommend to put it in a different file, but for simplicity's sake, we'll just keep it inside of the same file just to make things a little more clear. Okay, so now the method that we need to override is called should override URL loading. Okay, now with that, it's pretty simple. We just need to do view, which is the web view that this client is hooked up to, which we'll do in a second. So view, because it passes in a web view. So view is a web view. And we'll do load URL here. Okay, and here's the URL that was requested, okay? And then we'll return true to let it know that the request has been handled properly, okay? So now what we'll do is we'll still call load URL here, but what we'll do now is we'll actually need to set a WebView client, okay? So since we now have a WebView client, we'll need to set it here, and here's the method to call. It's called set WebView client, and we'll pass in a new WebView client. Okay, guys? So that will take care of that. So now what's going to happen is the load URL request will take place, and it'll say, oh, okay, a web client is going to take care of overriding the URL loading. Okay, so it needs to take care of that. So what do I need to do? So in here it says, oh, okay, well then I'll let the web view, take care of it. And then ultimately the web view will say, okay, I'll handle it. Don't call the default browser for the phone. All right, so let's go ahead and run this, guys, and make sure that it's actually doing it. And I'm not just lying to you, okay? So let me prove that it is working the way that I explained it should. Okay. All right, so there you go. So now the web view did not go and hand it off to the browser. Now it actually did the handling of the URL by itself, okay? So you can come into here now, and if you wanted to search Google, come into here, click on a link, and there you go. So it's working. This part at least is working. And that's pretty much it. Now notice when I hit the back button, what happened was it didn't go back to Google. What happened was it just killed the app, okay? And that's another feature that we'll need to add, is the back button feature. And we're also going to add, of course, the text view feature, which is this is the app that is completely done. So what we'll need to do here is we'll actually need to add in the request for the URLs when it's inputted by the user manually. Okay, so here, you know, doing like youtube.com, it'll come up and it'll pull up YouTube. So let's go ahead and add that feature to our project now. Okay, so in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to need to add a event for the URL. Now this is going to be right here. We already have a find view by ID, so we already have a reference to it, so we're not going to get a null value. So what we'll do is we'll do URL, and we'll do .click, okay? And we will handle an event with it that'll be called whenever this is clicked, okay? And this will be called when its action button, the go button, is clicked, okay? So when that happens, what we'll do is we'll do m web client, okay? So what we should do now is, here we have a Instantiate web view client, but we have it pretty much on the fly, okay? So what we want to do, and to make it a little easier on ourselves, is we'll do web view client and web client. And then right here, we can do new web view client. And then we'll pass in this web view client right here. Okay, so now we have a reference to that to be able to be used, okay? And what we'll do is we'll call should override URL loading, which is the guy that we just overrid right here. We'll actually manually call it and simply just pass in the URL that is being sent, okay? So it requires two parameters, a web view, which is no problem. We have the web view right here. We'll pass that in, and then finally we'll pass in the URL as a string, okay? And that's going to be just this right here. So the text of the URL at the time that the user hit the click button. Okay, guys? So that should handle that request, okay? Now, that should handle all that. Now what we need to do is now we need to add the back button, okay? So the back button is going to be needed whenever the user hits the back button. We want them to go back to the previous page right now the application just closes entirely, okay? So what we need to do is we need to override the onKeyDown method, and this is going to be for the activity, okay? So we're going to override the activities onKeyDown method, okay? So what we want to do is we want to do e.keycode. So this is whenever a key is pressed, okay? So we want to make sure that the key that's pressed is in fact the back button, okay? So if e.keycode equals back. So we could check to see if it's like A or alt left or whatever, but what we want to check for is back, okay? And another way to do this is we can just override the onBackPressed method for the activity, but we'll do it this way just for the heck of it. And we want to return true to let it know that we handle it properly. And all we need to do inside of this condition, guys, if the back button is in fact pressed, we just need to go back, okay? And there is a go back method inside of the web view that we can call, so it makes it really simple on us, okay? So now that takes care of the key of the back button pressed, and this takes care of the URL handled by the user, handled by the web client when the user is actually putting in a URL, okay? So the last thing that we need is the progress bar, okay? So the progress bar is going to be, we want to let the user know when the actual web view is loading, because if not, then it's kind of like ambiguous when it's loading and when it's just sitting there. It kind of looks like it's frozen, and the user might think, what the heck's going on? But if we show them a loading bar, then what will happen is they'll wait and just be a little bit more patient, okay? So that being said, let's go ahead and add that in. All right, so the progress bar is we're going to want to center it inside of the web view, okay? And whenever I center stuff, I like to try to use a relative layout, okay? Because the relative layout makes it really simple to center its children, okay? Because it allows them to have a layout in center apparent, and we can just set that to true, okay? So you want to embed the web view inside of it, and we also want to put a progress bar, okay? So the linear layout is stacking the edit text in the relative layout, and inside the relative layout there's a web view and a progress bar whose layout center and parent we just set to true. If we had the progress bar inside of the linear layout, so if we had it like this, we wouldn't be able to use layout center and true, okay? So this is why we put it in a relative layout, so that it centers nicely. Okay, guys? So if we come over here, we can see that, let's see, it's not rendering properly. So there's probably a reason why. Let's go ahead and back over to the source and figure out what's going on. So, jumped the gun a little bit. So what I did not do is specify the most common properties for this is the width and height. Okay, so the width, it was like, what the heck to do? I don't know what to do. You didn't tell me how big to be. Okay, so that's what happened there. All right, so now we got these right here. It should look pretty good. And if you are wondering where the progress bar is, the visibility is set to invisible by default. So just set it to visible if you want to see exactly where it's at. But it is centered. So when we set it to visible, it will show up in the center of the screen. And the last thing we're going to want to do is just change the theme. Okay, so we're going to do theme black, no title bar. Okay, so that'll show you how it looks inside of the designer, but to actually change it inside of the activity, we need to set the theme property. Okay, so we do theme Android style, and I believe it was called theme.black. Yeah, theme.black.no title bar. Okay, that should do it. All right, so now that we have the progress bar, we'll need to grab a reference of it, of course, inside of our code, okay? And then we need to grab the reference of it here. It's going to be a progress bar. And we want the ID of it to just be progress bar. Okay, let's go ahead and change that over here. Yeah, okay, so it's already progress bar, so good deal. Now let's go ahead and just do a rebuild. And it looks good. Okay, so now the last thing that we need to do, guys, is we want the progress bar to show up. Okay, so right now it's invisible. So we want to have it show and disappear when the page is loading and not loading. Okay, so we have some nice methods that we can use for this. Okay, so inside of the web client, we'll want to override on page started. Okay, and then we'll also want to override on page finished. Okay, so when the page starts loading and then when the page finishes. Okay, so here we want to specify, okay, when the page starts loading, to show the progress bar. When it's finished, hide it. Okay, but the only problem is when we are in a different class, how do we reference the progress bar? Okay, and there's obviously many different ways. You can pass in some other stuff, or you can pass in the web view, you can, or the activity, and then change it there, or you can probably make it static. But what we're going to use here is just a delegate. Okay, so the delegate is pretty handy in this case, and remember that a delegate is just a field that knows how to call a method. Okay, so we'll call it toggle progress bar, and it will take in any method tied to it will have one parameter. Okay, so this basically says, okay, anything that's any kind of method that's tied to it that it subscribes to. So anything that subscribes to this delegate has to have a void type and a void return type, and then take in one parameter that is an integer. Okay, so that is like declaring a class kind of. Okay, so that's kind of declaring a class or like a type, and then here we actually need to instantiate a delegate of toggle progress bar type. Okay, and here we'll just call it M on progress bar changed. Okay, so we have our delegate, and then we have basically a delegate of this type. Okay, so an event of this type, toggle bar progress bar, toggle progress bar, little tongue twister, and then this means that whatever subscribes to it once again has to have the function has to have a return type of void and a one parameter that is an integer. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now that being said, what we can do is come over here and do on page started. Okay, so on page started, we want to check to see if it is not equal to null, and it will be null if there is no subscribers. So that's like also saying as long as there are subscribers. So if there is subscribers, then invoke, so broadcast for all your subscribers to fire their methods. Okay, so once again we'll do it for the same thing here. So if it does not equal null, so if the on progress changed delegate does have subscribers, then invoke with a parameter. Okay, and the parameters I'm just using is 0 and 1. 0 for the state and 1 for another state. Okay, so if it's 0 and 1, whether it's on or off. Okay, so then we'll just check these values, and then depending on what it is, we'll know, okay, on page started, show it. 0, don't show it. Okay, so that's going to be firing the events. Okay, so now we need to come up here when you actually need to subscribe to the on progress changed delegate. Okay, and we could do that up here. So web client on progress changed. Okay, that looks pretty good there. And client. Okay, so to make things easy, we'll just actually change the type to the subclass type, okay? So we had the base class, which doesn't have an onProgress changed delegate. And we can cast it, wouldn't be no problem. But just to make things simple, we'll go ahead and just call it this way, okay? Okay, and then remember, it's going to give us a little bit of it's basically going to say, hey, what are you doing? Because it wants a parameter, so we don't want to forget that, okay? So remember, anything that's subscribed to it has to have a parameter of type integer, okay? So this is going to fire whenever it's invoked, which is in 2 different places, okay? So we can check the state. And remember that if it's 0 or 1, okay? So if it's 1, then show the progress bar. And if it's 0, then don't, okay? So we'll do done loading, hide progress bar, okay? And we'll do end progress bar. And we want to change the visibility of it to invisible. And then we'll do the exact opposite here, okay? Where we want to change the visibility of it to visible. And that'll toggle it on and off depending on whether the Webview client is loading or not loading, okay? So that being said, let's go ahead and run this application and make sure that it is working the way that it should. And like I said, this is just like a Webview. Then this is just a way to kind of show you guys what a Webview is and when to use it and what it can come handy for. And making a simple browser out of it is I think a good way to kind of get your hands dirty on working with a Webview and just seeing the things that it can do. Okay. So that being said, let's go ahead and test it out. So let's first go to a website such as, I guess, Facebook or something, and our loading bar is showing, and it disappears when it's supposed to. So the page is done loading, and then it disappeared. So that's exactly what we want. Let's make sure the back button is working. It goes back to the previous page. Looks like the keyboard's working. Make sure the hint's working, and that's our go button that we want to. This is what invokes the click event for the edit text, okay? And yeah, looks good, okay? So there you have it, guys. That's just like I've already said before, that's just a Webview, and there's many other things that you can do with the Webview, and then with the Webview client you can do some other cool stuff and add some more features to make it probably a lot better web browser than this one is. But this hopefully gives you a good idea and just a simple example of what you can do with the Webview. Okay, thanks for watching, guys.